The coffin had just been lowered into the ground when my phone vibrated in my trembling hands. A text appeared on the screen, the letters burning into my eyes. I'm alive. Trust no one. Even your daughters. For a moment, I thought my grief had twisted into madness. How could my husband, the man we were burying, that very moment be alive? And why would he warn me against the two people I had given life to? Before I take you further into this story, I want to pause. If you were in my place standing at your husband's grave, reading a message that shattered every certainty you had, what would you do? I truly want to hear your thoughts. Please share your feelings in the comments below and let me know which part of the world you're watching this from. And if you want to stay with me through this journey, don't forget to subscribe. Your support means more than you know. My name is Isabella Cruz. I am 64 years old, and for the last 4 decades, I lived quietly in a small coastal town in Florida. My days were simple: mornings, sewing clothes for neighbors, evenings, cooking rice and beans the way my mother taught me, and weekends spent beside my husband Ricardo in his modest boat repair shop by the marina. We were not wealthy, but our lives were rich with laughter, shared burdens, and the salty air of the Gulf. That morning, the sky was gray as ash, as if the heavens themselves mourned with me. Friends from church whispered condolences, their hands warm on my shoulders. My daughters, Camila and Elena, stood by the casket with perfectly practiced grief. Their eyes glistened with tears, but their bodies remained still, almost too composed. I remember thinking how strange it was, how their arms felt cold when they hugged me, how quickly their gazes slid away. And then came that message. I'm alive. My knees nearly gave out, and I gripped the edge of the folding chair to stay upright. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I swallowed the words, forcing silence into my throat. I could not let anyone see what I had just read. Not yet. As the pastor prayed, his voice rose and fell like the waves outside the cemetery gates, but I heard nothing. My mind was spinning a reel of questions flashing one after another. If Ricardo was alive, who lay in that coffin beneath the earth, if he was alive, why would he send me a warning about my own daughters? I turned my head toward Camila. Her black dress fit too neatly, her pearl earrings catching the faint light. She looked less like a grieving daughter and more like a guest at a corporate dinner. Elena, my younger one, bit her lip nervously, fingers twitching as though she wanted to check her phone. They were my girls. I raised them with my own hands through hunger storms and long nights of stitching torn clothes under a dim lamp. Could they possibly... A gust of cold wind cut through the cemetery, lifting the veil from my face. It felt like a whisper from the grave, or perhaps from beyond it. My heart pounded, torn between grief and suspicion. I looked down at my phone again, the message still there, glowing like a flame in the darkness of my loss. That was the moment my mourning turned into fear. And fear, as I would soon learn, is only the beginning of a deeper truth. The night after Ricardo's funeral, I sat alone at our kitchen table, the silence pressing down heavier than the Florida humidity. My phone lay in front of me, that cursed message still glowing in my memory. I wanted to dismiss it as a cruel prank, yet something deep inside whispered it was real. To survive the fear clawing at me, I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to where it all began. I was only 20 when my mother and I left Havana. We carried 2 suitcases, a handful of pesos, and a hope that America would be kinder to us than the Cuba we had left behind. I worked as a seamstress, bent over cheap fabric in a crowded apartment, saving every dollar to pay rent and medicine for my sick mother. My life felt small, colorless, until I met Ricardo. He was 24, then sunburned from long days as a deckhand, his hands rough with rope burns. I still remember the first time I saw him standing at the harbor with the sea breeze lifting his dark hair, his smile hesitant but disarming. "Señorita," he said softly, as if afraid to scare me away, "you dropped this." He handed me a scarf I hadn't even realized had slipped from my bag. His fingers brushed mine, and something inside me stirred. Our courtship was as modest as the lives we lived. Dates under the pier where the lanterns glowed like tiny stars. Sandwiches we split in half because neither of us had enough for more. But I never felt poor. With Ricardo, even the simplest meal was a feast. Every moment carried a promise of something lasting. When he finally opened his little boat repair shop, it felt like we were planting roots in soil that had once been foreign. The shop smelled of salt grease and fresh paint, his sanctuary our livelihood. By then, we were married, living in a 2-bedroom cottage with a tin roof that rattled every storm. We set out pots to catch the leaks and laughed as if rain was a blessing, not a curse. Camila was born on a humid July morning. I had never seen Ricardo cry before, but when he held her tiny body, tears slid down his weathered cheeks. 2 years later, Elena arrived softer in spirit, always reaching for her father's calloused hand. I gave them every ounce of myself, my youth, my health, my dreams, believing love was enough to bind us forever. We were poor, yes, but our home was rich, in something money could never buy. Ricardo would come in from the harbor smelling of seawater and oil, place a kiss on my forehead, and whisper, "We have everything we need, mi amor." And for many years, I believed him. But memories can be cruel. As I sat there in the stillness, recalling the love that built my life, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing harder. My daughters, the very ones who once clung to my skirt and begged for bedtime stories, now looked at me with cold, distant eyes. If Ricardo's warning was true, if they had turned against us, then everything I once held sacred was unraveling. I didn't know it then, but those warm memories were about to collide with a darker present where love itself would be tested by greed. The memories of our humble beginnings were like warm embers I clutched on cold nights. But as the years passed, those embers dimmed, replaced by something I never thought I'd know, as a mother, distance from my own children. Camila, my firstborn, had always been ambitious. Even as a little girl, she asked questions no child her age should care about. Why don't we have a car like the neighbors? Why is our house so small? Ricardo would ruffle her hair and tell her, because we have love, Hija, and love is more valuable than gold. But her eyes would narrow, already searching for something beyond what we could give. By 25, she had married Thomas Green, a man twice her size with an even bigger ego. He wore tailored suits and spoke with that sharp tone people in boardrooms use to slice others down. From the first dinner at our cottage, I felt his contempt. He glanced around our modest living room as if the peeling paint on the walls might stain his expensive tie. "You've done..." Well, considering he said as though we were charity cases. Ricardo's jaw tightened, but he stayed polite. I, however, felt my heart sink. I knew in that moment my daughter had chosen a man who would always see us as less. Elena, my younger one, had once been the softer spirit. She studied nursing, and I was proud, so proud to see her help others. But as the years passed, I noticed she followed Camilla's lead like a shadow. Whenever Camilla spoke with authority, Elena nodded along even when her own eyes betrayed doubt. It was Thomas's words, though, that seemed to shape them both. He had a way of planting ideas like poison ivy slowly climbing and choking whatever innocence remained. It started with small comments. "This house is too much for you to maintain. Ricardo should think of retiring before he hurts himself." Then the suggestions grew sharper. Almost commands: sell the shop, sell the house, move into a retirement community. It's safer, easier. You deserve comfort. But I could hear what lingered beneath their words: inheritance, money control. Our home was more than brick and wood. It was every memory of our lives together. Yet to them, it was just a number, an asset waiting to be liquidated. Around this time, Father Mateo, the old parish priest who had been Ricardo's confidant for decades, pulled me aside after Mass. His voice was low, steady, but laced with concern. "Isabella, I don't want to alarm you, but I've noticed men I don't recognize near Ricardo's shop in recent weeks. They watch more than they work. And Thomas, he asks questions he has no right to ask." His words struck me like a cold tide rushing over bare skin. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination or Mateo's cautious nature. But deep down, I knew. Ricardo had grown quieter at night, staring out at the water with furrowed brows, as though he carried a burden he dared not speak aloud. That was when I first felt the fracture widening, not just between us and our daughters, but between truth and lies. I had no idea then how far that fracture would split open or how much of my world would fall into it. The tension in our family had grown like a storm cloud, heavy and unspoken, and then without warning, it broke. It was a Tuesday morning, warm but unsettled, when the phone rang with a sharpness that made my heart stumble. Mrs. Cruz, a voice I didn't recognize, said, "There's been an accident at the shop. You need to come quickly." I remember gripping the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. My body wanted to collapse, but something colder, stronger kept me moving. I rushed to Memorial Hospital, the salty air of the harbor burning my lungs as though I were drowning. Ricardo lay in the ICU, his body bandaged, machines breathing for him. The doctors spoke of an explosion of burns and trauma words that felt like knives against my chest. Yet when I closed my eyes, I saw his meticulous hands, the way he cleaned and maintained every tool, every bolt, every wire. Ricardo was not careless. He would never allow such a disaster. Camilla and Thomas were already there too quickly, as if they had been waiting for this moment. She stood beside the bed, her face a mask of grief, but her voice betrayed her. "What about his life insurance?" she whispered to Thomas, not realizing I heard. "Will it cover this?" I felt bile rise in my throat. Elena sat in the corner, eyes downcast, hands twisting in her lap. She did not speak, but her silence cut deeper than words. I wanted her to cry, to scream, to demand answers, but she remained still like a shadow trapped in her sister's light. That night, as the machines hummed, Ricardo stirred for a moment. His eyes fluttered beneath the bruises, his lips trembling. I leaned close, holding his hand so tightly I thought I'd break it. And in a voice so faint I almost believed I had imagined it, he whispered, "If anything happens, don't trust them. Not completely. Them. Our daughters." My blood ran cold, yet I pushed the thought away, terrified of what it implied. 2 days later, Ricardo was gone. The doctors claimed the injuries were too severe, that his body couldn't fight any longer. But when I returned to the shop to gather his things, my suspicions deepened. The place was spotless. Too spotless. There were no scorch marks, no broken glass, no signs of the chaos an explosion should leave behind. Even the workbench looked polished tools lined in neat rows, as though prepared for inspection. And then I noticed something else, an empty hook on the wall where the security camera used to hang. Ricardo had installed it himself just months earlier, insisting it's better to be safe. But now it was gone. When I asked around the harbor, no one admitted to removing it, though one neighbor swore he saw Thomas near the shop the night before the so-called accident. Grief and suspicion twined together inside me like two serpents, strangling every breath. My husband was dead, and yet nothing about his death felt real. And still the message on my phone haunted me. I'm alive. After Ricardo's funeral, the world should have slowed into grief, into rituals of mourning. But for me, there was no peace, no gentle rhythm of sorrow. There was only noise, questions louder than any prayer, shadows longer than the Florida twilight. I began sorting through Ricardo's desk in the small room he called his office. The scent of varnish and seawater still clung to his papers, as though his hands had just left them. At first, it was ordinary receipts from the marina repair orders, notes scribbled on scraps of paper. But then I found an envelope marked in his neat handwriting, "Insurance." Inside was a policy I had never seen before. My heart thudded as I read the numbers. Just 6 months ago, Ricardo had increased his life insurance tenfold. From a modest sum meant to cover funeral expenses, it had become a fortune too large, too tempting, and he had never once told me. My husband, who shared every detail of his day, who never bought a tool without asking my opinion, had kept this secret. Or perhaps, I realized with a chill, someone had pushed him into it. The proof came in a small leather notebook tucked beneath the papers. On one page, written in his steady hand, were the words, "Camila wants me to sign more documents. Says it's for protection. Something feels wrong." My throat tightened as if a rope had cinched around it. He had doubted her, our daughter, and yet he signed anyway, or perhaps he refused, and that refusal cost him his life. As I sat frozen with the notebook in my lap, a knock startled me. It was Gloria, my widowed neighbor, carrying a casserole dish I could not eat. She had lived next door for 20 years, a friend in the truest sense. Her eyes searched mine before she spoke. "Isabella, I don't know if I should tell you this, but the night before the accident, I saw Thomas at the shop." He wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize went in with him. They stayed for nearly an hour. The dish slipped from my hands and shattered across the floor. The image of Ricardo's spotless workshop returned to me, every surface gleaming as though scrubbed clean. Too clean. Later that night, my phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the bank accounts. Look at the withdrawals. My pulse hammered as I drove to the local branch the next morning, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Mrs. Thompson, the manager, had known us for decades. She gave me the statements with a sympathetic smile, unaware she was handing me a knife that would cut deeper than grief. Line after line of withdrawals glared at me. $2,000, $3,000, $500, $4,000 amounts. I had never authorized reasons I could not explain. The signatures looked like Ricardo's, but shakier, uncertain. And according to Mrs. Thompson, he had not always come alone. I remember seeing your son-in-law with him once or twice, she said gently. He said Ricardo needed help with the paperwork. I left the bank with my knees trembling. My husband had left behind a trail of warnings, and now strangers, or perhaps not strangers at all, were speaking through my phone. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Ricardo's death was not an accident. It was a plan. I walked out of the bank with the statements clutched against my chest, as though they might stop my heart from breaking. The Florida sun was blazing, but I felt cold, as if the air itself recoiled from what I had just learned. Withdrawals. Ricardo never told me about signatures that didn't look like his steady hand, and Thomas's shadow everywhere I turned. That night, as I sat in the kitchen staring at the notebook I had found, a knock rattled my door. I almost didn't answer. My nerves were frayed, and fear had become my closest companion. But when I opened it, a tall man with silver hair and weathered eyes stood there. "Mrs. Cruz," he said softly, "my name is Samuel Vega. Ricardo asked me to come to you, if anything happened." The name made me stagger. Vega. Ricardo had mentioned him once years ago, a retired detective, an old fishing buddy who had seen too much of the world's darkness. My husband, cautious as always, had prepared for a future I refused to imagine. Samuel stepped inside and placed a small recorder on the table. "Your husband was worried. He hired me 3 months ago to look into Camila and Thomas. He suspected their business dealings weren't clean. Gambling debts, shady property flips, whispers of laundering money. He wanted proof, not because he didn't love them, but because he feared their greed would swallow everything." I pressed my palm to my chest. My daughters, my flesh, my blood entangled in something that had led us here to a coffin that might not even hold Ricardo's body. "Listen," Samuel said, clicking play. The recorder crackled before a voice filled the room. Camilla's voice. "My beautiful, ambitious firstborn. He's stubborn. He'll never sell the shop. We can't wait forever. Once the insurance clears, we'll have everything. Thomas says it has to look like an accident." My blood ran ice. Every word dripped with calculation, with a coldness no mother could reconcile. I wanted to throw the recorder across the room to destroy the sound of her voice conspiring against the man who raised her, but I couldn't. It was evidence. It was truth. Samuel laid a small brass key on the table. "Ricardo gave me this. Said it was for you, if he couldn't protect himself. It opens a safe deposit box downtown." My hands trembled as I turned the key over. The next morning, I went with Samuel to the bank. Inside the box was a single envelope with my name written in Ricardo's hand. I tore it open, and his words bled into my soul. "Isabella, if you are reading this, I was right to be afraid. Camila and Thomas have pushed me to sign things I do not trust. If I refuse, I fear they will not stop. If I disappear, know this, I loved you, more than the sea, more than life itself. Do not trust them. Protect yourself. Protect Elena if you can. Forgive me for leaving you with this burden." Tears blurred the page, but my resolve sharpened. Ricardo had seen the storm coming. Now it was on me to survive it. The letter from Ricardo still burned in my hands when the knock came, not gentle this time, but sharp, insistent, almost like a warning. I opened the door to find Camila, Thomas, and Elena standing on my porch. Camila wore a tailored black dress, too polished for grief, her lips pressed into a smile that never touched her eyes. Thomas carried a leather briefcase while Elena's gaze darted nervously between them and me. Mother Camila began sweetly, "We need to talk. It's important about your future." The air tightened around me. I let them in, though every instinct screamed against it. Thomas wasted no time placing a stack of documents on my kitchen table. "These are transfer papers," he said smoothly. "It's just a formality. Signing them ensures your assets are managed properly. You don't want to be burdened at your age." At my age. As if my years had already stripped me of clarity of strength. I stared at the papers. Ricardo's warning echoed in my mind, "Don't trust them." Camila leaned closer, her tone sharpened. "Mother, you've been under stress, seeing things that aren't real. Elena agrees it's best you let us handle everything. It's for your safety." Elena's lips parted, but no words came. Her hands trembled as she fiddled with her necklace. My heart ached for her, the daughter who once sat by my side sewing quilts, now silent in her sister's shadow. Before I could speak, another voice entered the room. Father Mateo. He had come uninvited, his worn cassock dusted from the salt air. "Isabella." He said, his voice strong, though his body was frail. "You don't have to sign anything. This is coercion, plain and simple." Thomas's smile twisted. "Stay out of this, Father, or I'll make sure the diocese hears about certain questionable expenses you've made. Do you want to lose your parish over someone else's delusions?" The old priest didn't flinch. "The only delusion here is thinking you can bury truth under lies." Camila slammed her hand on the table. "Enough, Mother, this has gone far enough. Sign the papers or we'll have no choice but to petition the court. We already spoke to a lawyer. They'll declare you incompetent. You'll lose everything." Something inside me snapped. Decades of silence, of forgiving slights, of excusing arrogance, all of it turned to fire. I rose to my feet, my voice trembling but fierce. "You dare stand in my house, in the home your father built with his hands, and speak of competence. You killed him, Camila, you and your husband. Don't deny it. I've heard your voice on tape. I know the truth." The room went still. Camilla's eyes widened, then narrowed into slits. Elena gasped, clutching her chest, her face pale as snow. "Mama, is it true?" She whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the unspoken horror. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across Camilla's perfect mask. Thomas reached for the papers, but my hand struck them aside, scattering them across the floor like fallen leaves. "I will not be silenced," I said, my voice stronger than I had ever known. "You wanted me weak, broken, forgotten. But you underestimated the strength of a mother fighting for the man she loved." Elena burst into tears, torn between the sister she obeyed and the mother who had raised her. And I, standing taller than grief itself, realized the war for truth had only just begun. The silence after my accusation clung to the walls like smoke. Camilla's face hardened. Thomas cursed under his breath, and Elena crumbled into sobs. But I no longer trembled. My husband's warnings, the evidence Samuel had gathered, the very weight of my own grief, they had forged me into something stronger than fear. The next morning, I met Samuel in his modest apartment above the marina. On the table lay a stack of files, photographs, and the small recorder that carried my daughter's betrayal. "It's time," Samuel said. His voice carried both gravity and resolve. Together we walked into the police station, carrying the truth like a weapon. I laid everything before the detective on duty, the recordings of Camila and Thomas, whispering about insurance, the falsified documents Thomas had drawn up, the sudden unexplained withdrawals from our account. Samuel added the photographs he had taken Thomas meeting men in back alleys, envelopes exchanged under the cover of night. The case cracked open like thunder. Investigators found what Ricardo had feared all along. Thomas was entangled with a laundering ring, drowning in debt, desperate for a way out. The insurance money had been their salvation, and Ricardo their obstacle. The explosion had been no accident. He had been poisoned, his death staged, his body disguised under fire and smoke. When the arrests came, I was there. Camilla was still in her black dress, still trying to wear control like perfume. But as the officers read her rights, her mask slipped, and for the first time I saw her not as my daughter, but as a stranger, hollowed by greed. Thomas resisted shouting threats, but the handcuffs silenced him. Elena stood frozen, her world unraveling before her eyes. She turned to me, tears streaming. "Mama, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I believed her, though the weight of her silence still cut deep. In the end, she agreed to testify, her voice trembling as she recounted the pressure, the forged papers, the whispers in darkened rooms. She became a witness, not an accomplice, and though the wound between us will never fully close, I still hold a corner of hope for her soul. Later, Samuel confessed the truth of the messages, the words that had first shaken me at the grave. "I'm alive. Trust no one." They had not come from Ricardo's hand, but Samuel's. My husband had feared the worst, and in his final days asked his friend to protect me with lies if necessary. That false promise of his survival had bought me enough time to uncover the truth. My heart broke all over again, but I understood. Even in death, Ricardo had shielded me. Months passed. Trials ended. Camila and Thomas were sentenced, their names forever bound to betrayal. Elena moved away, searching for a life unchained from her sister's shadow. And I, carrying the weight of both loss and justice, chose to turn grief into something greater. With the settlement money and donations from neighbors who stood by me, I founded the Ricardo Cruz Foundation, an organization to help families torn apart by greed and betrayal. Every scholarship, every counseling session, every rescued life carried Ricardo's name forward, not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience. One morning at the edge of dawn, I walked with Father Mateo to the shoreline where Ricardo once cast his nets. The horizon bled with soft pink and gold, the sea whispering like an old friend. We sat in silence, two weary souls watching the tide. I closed my eyes and felt the warmth of the sun on my face. For the first time since his death, I did not feel crushed by grief. Instead, I felt Ricardo beside me, steady, patient, proud. The day was breaking, and so was I, not into pieces, but into light.